If you've ever played snooker, then you will have noticed the tables themselves are actually pretty big, and the rules say you must keep at least 1 foot on the floor at all times. And you can't do anything about this. There's some shots even the tallest players won't be able to reach. So what happens if the shoes you're wearing are really, really big? These are novelty clown shoes, disappointingly the biggest shoes I could find, but they are still over 5 inches bigger than my regular shoes. Which means I can comfortably reach another 5 inches further down the table. But how does this work? Because the shoes don't actually make me any taller. You'd think you want to be higher up with platform shoes or something, but now as you can see I'm way too high above the table to play normally. And even if I'm stretching for a shot, then being higher up isn't going to help. What I really need is longer shoes. You might be thinking this is incredibly silly, and you'd be right. But even though these cause a few dress code violations, they do allow me to play regular shots, and using the extended toe of the shoe allow me to stretch further. But the point is, if you look at the shoes of professional snooker players, they all have pointy toes to take advantage of the same effect. So buy yourself some pointy shoes so you can reach as far as the pros do. But this isn't the only hack I've learnt that helps improve your snooker, and if you put them all together it can actually make a big difference, and I'll explain what the rest of them are after this trick shot finally ends. Mostly in the winter months you're going to notice your cue gets incredibly sticky, especially when you just arrive somewhere after a long car journey. You're not going to be able to cue smoothly, and this will affect your performance. To help with this, you can clean your cue, but whatever you do, don't use chemical or alcohol-based cleaners. Washing up liquid works the best, but regular hand soap works almost as well, and it's usually regularly available wherever you are. And once you've cleaned your cue with some hot soapy water and dried it off, it's going to be playing a lot better. Now that feels really good, but what's going to make it feel even better is just a small amount of spray polish. Again, just wipe it down with a cloth and make sure everything's dry before you go to play a shot, and all of a sudden you'll notice the cue will be gliding through your fingers like an absolute dream. But is there something we can do to simply improve your chances in the game itself? Next, if you're someone who struggles to play snooker consistently well, which if we're honest is everybody, then here's something that might help you. This is all about controlling the distance between the cue ball and the object ball and trying not to get uncomfortably close. When you're playing well, this means trusting your potting a little bit more. Obviously this means playing longer shots when you can't get closer. But this also means leaving yourself a little bit further away from the object ball than normal. If you're closer to the object ball, you will have an easier shot, but it's harder to get in that position in the first place. By leaving yourself a little bit more room, you have more landing area for the cue ball, which is fine if you're potting well. But what happens if you're struggling to play as well as you'd like? Then try to keep the cue ball a little bit closer. This isn't exactly easy, especially if you're not playing well. And playing close positional shots like this has a lot more risk involved, but this is probably the best way to get your form back when you're struggling, by just keeping close control on a handful of straightforward shots. But if you're really struggling, there's other things we can do to help make the game a tiny bit easier. But before our next tip, we're just going to find delayed something or other in Manila in the Philippines, which is there. And handily, our next tip is about tips. This is one of my old cues, and with this one I made the same mistake a lot of players make, and I over-rounded the tip. Weirdly, this makes it a little bit harder to play shots accurately, although you are able to get a little bit more spin on the cue ball. Even though it grips the cue ball significantly better, if you're just fractionally out with a rounded tip from the centre of the cue ball, all of a sudden you're going to be putting a small amount of side spin on the ball, and this is going to cause you to miss by a little way. But if you compare that to my current tip with a flatter dome shape, even if you move it to the left or right a little bit, the side of the tip is still going to make contact with the centre of the cue ball, giving you a bigger target area. So although a flat tip won't quite put as much spin on the cue ball, it will mean you're a lot more consistent. But what about just being consistent about playing shots in and around the black spot? You see, when you play shots around the black spot, you're always told to play the cue ball high enough to make sure you have the angle to come back down again. But sometimes you finish very straight on the black, and that's not always easy. Or you finish low on the black, which makes it very missable and makes it very difficult to stay in good position. What I'd suggest is leaving yourself an angle to play the black on and off the top cushion a lot more. This may seem like you're making the pot harder, but once you get used to the angle, you're really not, especially as you probably won't have to play this shot so hard and you won't have to do so much with the cue ball. Really all you have to do from this position is drop the black in. Another great thing about it is it's a lot easier to finish in position on the black like this. Really, if you do this, you're just making break building a lot easier. The problem with this is that cushions can sometimes be inconsistent, and quite often you'll get a lot larger bounce than you're expecting. This is a little bonus tip about cushions, because weirdly, if anything gets in between a snooker ball and a cushion, especially chalk, it makes it bounce further. As you can see with the white here with this very unscientific experiment, but give it a go yourself. Most players don't really realise how much this can affect their game, so a quick bonus tip is to just wipe down the cushions a little bit before you start and see what a difference it actually makes. Cue extensions were a revolution in snooker, and it means you can now play any shot with your own tip. But what you might not realise, especially if you don't have an extension with you, is that any old vacuum cleaner part will work as a cue extension to a lesser or greater extent. Obviously not every single part will fit every cue, but you'd be surprised how well this works, especially if you've gone somewhere without your extension and you're unable to reach your shot. I've tried this in the past, and this old vacuum cleaner head that I just happened to have lying around not only fitted my cue, but actually fitted a load of other cues I had in the room with me. Which is ideal if you happen to be playing snooker somewhere where there's no extensions, but there are old vacuum parts. Actually, now I come to think about it, I do know quite a few clubs that would fit that description. We've got a few more to go, but we're just going to first find Josh and Ryan from Peterborough in the UK, which is roughly there. After the last tip, I bet you're thinking, what is he going to come up with next? Okay, but seriously, trying to play a stun shot off a cushion can be one of the hardest shots to play in snooker. But if you dip the end of your cue on the backswing before bringing it up to the original height and then delivering it, for some reason I don't know why, this seems to make the shot a lot easier to play. But I don't really care why it works, because honestly it just makes these incredibly difficult shots a huge amount easier. Something else that makes the game easier is getting the right size cue, but this is actually a little bit more complicated than you might think. This is a standard size cue, it's about 56 inches long. The only problem is, however, in the last 100 years, humans have got a little bit bigger. This difference in size means if you're tall like me, a regular size cue is going to be a little bit too small for you. Ideally you want a cue that comes up roughly to about the height of your shoulder, because you're just going to be able to do a little bit more with it. It doesn't really make too much difference, and it's certainly not worth changing your cue for, but if you've got the right size cue, it just means you can reach a little bit further down the table. Next is a fairly simple one, but an important one, and it really helps you out when you finish a little bit too straight for the shot and you're trying to create an angle. So if you want to make the cue ball break wider and go further down the table, all you really need to do is strike down on it a little bit, and you won't have to hit it anywhere near so hard. You don't even need to strike down from that high on the cue ball to get this to work, but I'm not really sure why this happens, so if you know, leave a comment. Now for an important way to get in the right place. One of the hardest things to get right, even on a straight shot, is to line it up correctly. Put simply, even if your cue action is perfect, you may not be pointing in the right direction, which is obviously going to result in you missing. To make sure you're set up in the right place, when you're stood back from the shot, try and see where the top of the cue ball is going, if it's heading towards the right place on the object ball. You can then use your cue to guide you as you move towards the table, and hopefully this will get you exactly in the right place. There's a lot of other things that can go wrong, but hopefully it won't be this. I explain a little bit more about this in our video about how to stop missing shots, so have a look at that. And remember, don't just watch, play, and make the commitment to becoming a better player by subscribing to the channel and visit the website. See you later.